Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. We've got in the co-captain's chairs tonight, Mr. Chad Hutchinson, Chuck Alvarez, and Eric Porter. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, guys.
See you and all.
So we are going to tap into 1992 one more time here with another album battle. It's been 30 years since these two albums were released. We're celebrating their 30th birthdays, 30th anniversaries, however you like to look at it. And for some folks watching, these might be bands more on the obscure side. But stay with us, because I think if you are a Prog fan that goes way back to the 70s and you love all those classic bands, there isn't any reason at all why you won't love either of these two bands or these two albums. Both released in 1992. I think everybody in this Zoom here would agree that these are two of the bands that really helped drive and spearhead the whole early 90s prog revival, which was happening globally, not just in England or the States or wherever. And the two albums in question here that we're going to go head to head with tonight: Anglagard Hybris, debut album from this great band from Sweden. And then from here in the good old US of A, in Chad's home state in Pennsylvania, IA, Echolyn, Suffocating the Bloom. They're actually their second full-length album right there. Two very different bands. They don't sound anything alike really, but they both kind of draw from a lot of the same influences. So how we're going to do this is basically how we've done all of these album battles across the channel over the last couple of months. Everybody here in the Zoom is going to take their turn and talk about both releases, what they like about them, what they don't like about them, and then pick a winner of the battle between the two. So I'm going to have Chad kick us off here and discuss both of these very fine albums.
All right. Well, as you said, these two are very, very different from each other. On one hand, we've got Echolyn with their Americana flavored progressive rock, and on the other side, from literally across the ocean, we've got Anglagard with all their Swedish retro goodness. I mean, completely different. I would say, Echolyn's much more vocal driven, whereas Anglagard barely has any. The only vocals they have are actually 3 of the 4 songs on the original version of Hybris. And Echolyn's known for their multi-part harmonies, their Gentle Giant influences at times. So really could not be different bands. But let me start with Echolyn. And Suffocating the Bloom is their second album. It starts off with a bang. I think if you broke this into 2 sides, you have the first 10 tracks and then the Suite for the Everyman, say, the second side. It really starts off very strong. 21's a great song. It's about, innocence and turning 21 and your experiences. And you have Winter Through, which, even though it has Christmas references, is actually more about what happens in Pennsylvania these days. We don't get as much snow. It's like, we don't see white Christmases anymore and that kind of thing. And it's actually named after a housing development that Brett Cull saw called Winter Through Estates, which is kind of cool. Memoirs from Between, sort of a mini epic. That's just a phenomenal song. Then you get into 2 of their early classics, I'd say, In Every Garden and A Little Nonsense. Both of them are very playful, a lot of vocal interplay going on. Actually, before I get too far, I don't know if you guys know this, but there are 4 versions of this album. The original version was a silver disc. The second round of production was a red disc.
That's what I have.
Then there was a mistake. There's very few of these out, and the disc is all black.
That's the one I have.
Mm-hmm. You really?
Mistake. Yeah.
That's pretty good. Yeah. And then there's the remaster with the blue and red disc. So
I didn't even know there was a remaster of that, Chad.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know there was a remaster.
Yeah, they remastered it in 2000. They got the original master tapes back from Sony. When they got signed to Sony for As the World, Sony had this grand plan of reissuing their earlier material, and they bought it and they put it in a vault. Then they signed them, then they dropped them, and they were locked there for years. Yeah. And what happened was the band opened a show in Philadelphia for Transatlantic in, I forget what year it was, back right around that time, I guess. And their old producer was there. And he walked up to Brett after the show and said, here, he had pulled the tapes out of the vaults at Sony and gave them back to the band.
Nice.
Brett took those multi-tracks, remastered it. That's why As the World got a remaster, Suffocating got a remaster. You got the first album and the EP on the box set remastered. And later on, unrelated, they got Cowboy Poems Free remastered. But the first 3 albums were remastered. 4, I should say. The 3 albums plus the EP were remastered because their producer from As the World gave them the tapes back. Which
so the black CD, which issue was that? Was that the first? Or
I think it's the second one. I think it was supposed to be printed in the red. Actually, you can tell because there were typos fixed in the liner notes, and I didn't think to double check that, and I forget where it was. There was an because compared to the first reissue, the first edition with the silver disc, there are. I know I've seen the typos in here before, but heck if I know where they are now.
I think, and maybe Eric, you did as well. I'm pretty sure I bought Suffocating the Bloom right around the same time that As the World came out. I did them both at the same time.
Yeah. The black one is the same edition as the original silver.
Okay.
Because the booklet for the red one, the second official run, actually has their Bridge Records address at the bottom of the booklet.
Okay.
So
yeah,
there you go.
Here's a really lightweight kind of cheap paper. I mean, this was.
Yeah. So there's little Suffocating the Bloom history for you there. So let me get back to the album. So like I said, it starts off with a bang. I would say the first 6 songs, minus Reaping the Harvest, which is more of like an intro to In Every Garden kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Then I think it goes down a notch. Sentimental Gardens or Sentimental Chain is a lead into one voice, which I think is probably the weakest on the first half of the album. Mm-hmm. It has some of that, Ray doing the Lord's Prayer in it and that kind of thing. So it has a little cringe factor, and they'll admit that. Here I Am comes back with a little fervor, reminiscent of the earlier songs on that side. And then you have Cactopus, which is a bit of a tribute to Alan Holdsworth. It's sort of the most fusionist thing they've ever done. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the 28-minute suite for the Everyman. And I should go back and say that a lot of the album, I think at this point, I don't think Chris Busby, the keyboard player, wrote any lyrics yet. And so you're getting the experience of Brett Call and Ray Weston more throughout this whole thing. And the suite for the Everyman as a theme is a reaction to them sending out their first album and not getting signed by anybody. They literally had a wall in their studio in West Point, PA, covered in rejection letters. And this was sort of them letting out their anger. So you've got those that want to buy near the end, which is, saying exactly that. You've got Cash Flow Shuffle. You've got Mr. Oxymoron. So you've got some angst coming out in this. But the suite for the Everyman itself, again, it starts off pretty well. Songs like Bearing Down, Mr. Oxymoron, they're pretty strong. Then you get into some sort of spacier, more ethereal things. You've got the drum cannon in there, and I think it loses some of its momentum. Personally, I think they could have ended it after Mr. Oxymoron. It actually fades out nicely. Those next few songs, 12's Enough, I Am the Tide, Cannoning in B major, Picture Perfect. I think those 4, unless you read the lyrics and their Gardener's Guide, which was a printed companion to the CD, and it's on the website actually, it sort of loses that, you kind of lose the theme as a listener. It doesn't hold up as well. And then it comes back up with Those That Want to Buy and Suffocating the Bloom at the end. Personally, like I said, I think if they had made it a mini epic, take it out after Mr. Oxymoron, pull out those 4 shorter songs, and then let Those That Want to Buy and Suffocating the Bloom be their own tracks, not necessarily be part of the epic. It may have flowed better. It's also a 71-minute album.
Yeah.
It's pretty long.
Yeah.
You know, in comparison, As the World's 70 minutes, and everybody feels that one's long, as great as it is. So this outside, and I looked at it earlier, the Window album from 2002, that's 70 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
So this is as long as their longest album. And that came out as a double LP and a double CD and all that. So there's a lot of material here. So it's a strong album. It's not my favorite Echolyn album. There are a lot of tunes here that I went back and listened to it. And I used to spin the heck out of this album. There are some of my favorites. I do love 21, Winter Through, Memoirs from Between. That's a hell of a start for an album. I think that first side is very, very strong. And I think the second side is 60% strong, so shall we say. But the musicianship throughout's great. These guys are great players. Chris was coming into his own, writing more. He didn't write as much on the first one. Tom Hyatt is full-time bass on this one, where he split duties with Jesse Reyes on the first one. So he's in there doing his thing, and Tom's a hell of a player. And then the vocals. If you talk about Echolyn, you got to talk about the vocals. So there's lots of big 3-part harmonies in there, and lead trading between Ray and Brett. Ray with his more angst-driven voice, and Brett has sort of the softer voice for maybe some of the songs that are maybe a little more acoustic at times. But both are great for what they do. I love both their voices. I love their harmonies. So Suffocating Bloom, super strong album from '92. And Pete, like you said, if people haven't heard albums like this in the early '90s, give it a chance. This is just great stuff. And these were homegrown guys from suburban Philadelphia, and they're talking about their experiences. This is all Americana-ish with Prog thrown in there because they could, and it's really a phenomenal album. But then we have to compare it to Hybris, and now we go across the ocean, and there's the remaster. This has the extra track on it. So Anglagard is known for their modern take on retro-styled progressive rock. A lot of Yes in there, a lot of Genesis, some King Crimson. There's also a comparison to a New York-based band called Cathedral from 1978. Yep. I think it was 1978. They had one album called Stained Glass Picture, I believe it is.
Stories.
If you listen to that, you can say, oh, yeah, if Anglagard had heard of this band, and I don't know if they had, you'd say, wow, yeah, they took a page out of Cathedral's book. But you have really nice acoustic at times. Tord Lindemann played a lot of acoustic on these, and they had electric guitars from Jonas Anglagard. You got great flute from Anna Holmgren. You got big mellotrons on there. And then sort of the unsung hero of these of the Anglagard albums is Matthias Olsson. He plays like he's his own orchestra back there on percussion. And if you look at the list of instruments he played on this, it's insane. Besides the kit, triangles, tambourines, vibroslap, he's got stuff in here I don't even know what it is. What's a po-chung? I don't know what a po-chung is. Castanets, line bells, cowbell, woodblock, glockenspiel, tubular bells, bongos, bells, ice bell. Maybe that's a Scandinavian thing. They got more ice than we do. Finger cymbals, waterfall. I guess they recorded a waterfall. I don't think you play a waterfall. So knowing Matthias, and if you know Matthias, he's a little tweaked. He's a little nuts. I love the guy, but he's a little nuts, and he will admit that to you. He would probably try to play a waterfall. Agogo bells, kabasa. Makes me hungry for Polish sausage. Claves, French cowbell, African drums, effect flute. So it's an amazing list. And
in other words, Matthias Olsson drums and a myriad of percussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I'm looking at Wikipedia, the list just goes on and on. But their sense of drama and tension is what really drives me to a lot of their stuff. And Hybris is full of it. There's a lot of soft pieces that all of a sudden change, and there's a time signature, and it starts to get real tense. And then they come and they punch you in the face. You know, big Rickenbacker bass and the mellotrons and the Hammond, and then they'll drop back off, and Anna will come in with this super sweet flute melody that's just gorgeous. And so there's a lot of this tempo change, dynamics, and every one of their songs on this album, all four of them, I'm not talking about the remaster, but the original album, are very dramatic, and they really will get your blood pumping and get your hair to stand up depending on what part of the song you're in. Jordrock, the opening, is my favorite of theirs. Is one of my favorites of the entire progressive rock catalog from start to finish, from the beginning of time till now. I just absolutely love that song. 11 minutes and 11 seconds of pure bliss. Yep. But every song on this album is very strong. The bonus track, which was on a sampler at one point, they included it for the remaster, is good. I don't think it's as good as the other four. I think it's down a notch. Even the recording of it is not quite as good. But the only other thing I would say about them is that the second, third, and fourth tracks, I'm not going to try to pronounce these. You know what they're called, but tracks 2, 3, and 4 each have some vocals. The first one has a male and a female vocal together with it. The second one is probably just toward Lindemann, and I think the Kung Bore is probably just toward as well. But there's not a lot of vocals. The second album had no vocals at all. And the third album had no vocals at all. But even though the vocals are in Swedish, I don't think they take away from it. And they can be a little jarring if you're not used to it. I know we talked before or you guys talked before when you were doing Bonko, how people will not listen to foreign language albums because they need to hear it in English. And that's a mistake. Especially if you haven't heard Anglagard, if you can take a little bit of vocals in a different language, you can get past these pretty easily. They're pretty minimal. They're not off-putting whatsoever. But it's a killer album from top to bottom. And as much as it pains me to say this, Brett, Ray, Chris, Tom, I'm sorry, but the nod has got to go to Anglagard. I think, like I said before, this is not my favorite Echolyn album, even though I love it. Hybris would have a tough time going up against things like May and
As the World.
Yeah, actually, I like May better than As the World. I like The End is Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The Window album's great. I think their last one, I Heard You Listening, is great.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to pick a favorite, and I know Luis would agree with me, would be May. I love May. So Hybris would probably lose to May, but in this competition this evening, my friends, I gotta go with Hybris.
Okay. 1-0, Anglagard.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck.
All right. Well, once again, good evening, gentlemen. Oh man, I found this to be a bit more tougher than I thought it was going to be, because I've had both albums for many years. I can't find my Anglagard. I wonder if one of my friends took it. But anyway, it's an album that I
better get that back.
I don't know which friend. I don't know which one has it. But
for everybody watching, if you got Chuck's Anglagard Hybris, fess up now.
Oh man, no, it's that I actually got that album before Echolyn's, which is Suffocating the Bloom. So I had quite some time to digest that album. And one of the, I remember people talking about that album and saying that they sounded a lot like King Crimson and Genesis, and yes, at times. But I also found them sounding a lot like Samla, Mama's. That what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the other one I can't pronounce. The TK from also from Sweden.
Tredio Garrett,
whatever. Yeah, I can't pronounce that, but yeah, there's that in there too.
See, what's it that they have that feel to them, and you could tell that they enjoy the ethnic Swedish background and so on. You hear that in their music. Which that also the hijinks that go on within certain parts of their songs, like Jordak, the very first song. When I listen to that song, I very rarely, like vaguely hear King Crimson in that. But regardless of what, if you go through the entire album, because I enjoy all 4 songs, I only have the album of 4 songs, and I don't have the 5th part on it. And so although I've heard the song and I really wasn't too crazy about it, but as far as that Anglagard album, so the vocals are not jarring whatsoever. You know, they happen to flow in with the song as they're playing. The musicianship is awesome in there. You know, just like mentioned before, Mateus is a great drummer. You know, everybody on there just sounds great. I would say that that this album, you know, I really wish that they would have kept on doing more albums, but there's just a whole lot of friction between all of them. But yeah, I love the album. I love Hybris. I think the Hybris is, you know, one of those unsung albums that I wish that more people would be able to get into, you know, and forget about the aspect of, you know, Swedish lyrics and so, because it's not that much in there. Like as mentioned before, the vocals are fine, the musicianship is awesome. And it's an album that I wish that was more readily available, you know, for people to sample. And then you have the American band Echolyn, one of my favorite bands, probably my favorite band from all of the progressive rock bands from that point onward. You know, being that, you know, them, Porcupine Tree, Spock's Beard, the Flower Kings. You know, these are the bands that created that new wave of bands that were coming out. When it came to their second album, Suffocating the Bloom, it's as mentioned, so it's a very good album. I don't think it's a great album because I do prefer the albums that came afterwards, although they do have 2 of my favorite songs by the band. You know, the As the World. I think that the song translate better, much better live. And then Winter Through, you know, Winter Through and 21 also is another song that I really do love from them. I still feel that on that album that especially being that the way the musicians that they are, and so I still think that they were still trying to find themselves, although they did very well on Suffocating the Bloom. And I also love this the title track as well. You know, the title track is a beautiful song, and it's just, you know, you just wonder how much it really flowed in with everything else beforehand. But I would say that if I'm going to go what's on this list over here, I'm going to go slightly towards Anglagard on this. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, Chuck, you were talking about the King Crimson influence. I actually hear a lot more King Crimson on Epilogue than I do on Hybris.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. So 2-0 Anglagard. So let's see, what are we going to have, a blowout or a tie here? Let's see. Eric.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, you went through so much, and Chuck, you made some great points that, you know, was kind of some of the stuff that I was thinking of. If I start with Echolyn, Suffocating the Bloom, we've all seen the cover. As Pete had mentioned before, I discovered them with As the World. And I kind of look at this as the baby brother, or let's say maybe the immature brother of As the World. And I think your point, Chad, that you made, there's some cringy lyrics in this, and obviously Echolyn's very vocal oriented and heavy. There's a couple things that just, they don't necessarily work for me lyric wise. And I do think the album is kind of front loaded. The best tunes are at the start of the album, and you pretty much detailed that out. You know, you get up to a little nonsense in that, and then there's kind of a fall off. But they have my heart. I love Echolyn. I absolutely love them. But I do think when you listen to As the World, one of the things that I got to be honest, I hadn't listened to Suffocating the Bloom in a while. It's not one of my favorites. And actually for both of these bands, I prefer Epilogue over Hybris, personally. But when I did go back and listen to this, I'm like, Chuck made this point. I feel like they were trying to find themselves, but when you listen to As the World, they're pretty close. As the World's a little more refined. Obviously it was on the major label. I'm sure that the arrangements and stuff between them, the producers, things were worked out more.
Yeah, and they were in a professional studio down in Nashville for that one too. I mean, that's after they got signed.
But you hear that, I mean, I think this album and As the World have the biggest, you know, we've talked about the Gentle Giant influence. These two have that. Much more than when they kind of came back with Cowboy Poems and onward, right? I mean, these are the two albums that really have that Gentle Giant influence. And I love them for it. And you've got to allow a band to develop. So when I was trying to compare these, I think that was one of the things when you're talking about Anglagard, it's their debut, but yet their sound is realized. I mean, they're there. They've gotten to where they are Anglagard. Here, Echolyn, I feel like there's work to be done, but they're finding themselves. And for some reason, Anglagard had it already on Hybris.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I don't know very much or at all any early history of Anglagard, how they came together, what were they doing before that, how long did it take them to make this album? There's not much out there about it.
Right. Yeah, it is. There's really not much history. And Chad, I know you know the guys in Echolyn fairly well.
Yeah.
Didn't some of Chris Busby's students actually play on Suffocating the Bloom?
I believe so. Yeah, like there's violins, there's flutes,
right?
There's cello, sax, viola. I'm pretty sure all of those are probably Chris's students.
That's what I thought I had read, and I was trying to look and find, and I couldn't find anything. But I you know, that part, I love now how, and not to get away from the topic, but they're putting out little clips now and then on Facebook.
Yeah,
I love.
They were at Chris's house this weekend working on stuff.
Yeah, and you see their little writing sessions, you see their writing sessions, and they'll give you a clip, maybe like a 45-second to a minute clip, and I love that. That's fantastic.
Well, I'm also very happy that Chris is doing better, health-wise.
Yes, health-wise.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's got a clean bill of health.
That's great awesome news, man.
Absolutely. So my heart is with Echolyn. I love Echolyn, and if someone were to say, we're going to wipe out your Anglagard collection or your Echolyn collection, I'm keeping my Echolyn.
Damn, that's a rough way of thinking of it, Eric.
That is a rough but I think
Desert Island's one thing, but holy shit, somebody comes in.
Hey, sometimes you're made to make those choices, But I think that point that I made with Hybris, that it for a debut album, I find that it's very cohesive and the sound is there. They have their sound and they've kind of stayed there. And it's just funny when you do the compares. You've got I've got the, I must have the remaster because I have the bonus track on mine, but you've got 4 tracks for Anglagard, you got 21 for Echolyn, right?
Yep.
You have Echolyn, I know that, it's self-produced, but it's a lot more raw. It's a lot more in your face. Whereas you have this ethereal, magical kind of feel with Anglagard. And Pete, you made a point this morning on the 92 shows, because I believe you, Anglagard was today.
Yep.
And the imagery you said, you were like, it's like these guys are out in the woods with a generator playing music, and it's like they're having a seance and they're trying to that really, there's a mystical quality to this, and the dynamics that this band uses, and Echolyn does too. Both bands really have an excellent dynamic range, but Chad, I think you said, they kind of go from that soft pastoral flute to all of a sudden they're punching you in the face. And you've got that really solid Rickenbacker that's just hammering that bass lines, and Matthias is an amazing drummer, percussionist. So I'm going to have to make it 3 and go with Anglagard Hybris, just because I think the band really everything was realized on this album. It's solid from start to finish. It's an amazing listen. So anyone who's not familiar with either of these bands, give them a shot. They're just great. And again, we're talking 30 years now between when these were released. And I forget when was the last Anglagard?
2012.
2012. Okay.
They released it at Nearfest, and ironically enough, after their show is when they fired Matthias. They actually fired him right after the show. Yeah.
And for anyone who does enjoy this, just as we just talked about, they are I believe they're promising by the end of the year, but with Echolyn, that can kind of, you never know. I think 2015 was, I heard you listening, right? So we're in 7 years out from their latest, but they have something cooking. So give them a chance and keep your eye on them, because they will have something coming out.
They've got a lot of music written. I think they're finally pretty far along, according to Brett. So hopefully we'll get some music from them pretty soon.
And if you guys are watching, I do love you. All of them.
We all love them, man.
Love that band.
Well, I think the moral of this whole story is that we love both of these bands a lot, and there's no loser here. I mean, obviously, if anybody's watched my daily program this month, albums that are 30 years old in 2022, celebrating the great albums from 1992, you know where these placed on my list, right? And they just happened, right? Today and yesterday, basically. There's not a lot that separates these two, I don't think, but there are some important things that do, and that's why they showed up the way they did in my ranking. So let's tackle this one first. Really strong. I think all three of you mentioned that there are some of the band's best tracks are on this album. I find that this album probably was longer than it needed to be. Like most of Echolyn's albums are pretty lengthy, including this one. I think A Suite for the Everyman has some brilliant moments on it. Did it need to be 28 minutes long? Might have been good at 20, right? I agree with Chad, who said it's really, really front loaded. The first like 5, 6, 7 tracks, excellent. Some of their best. I think this would have been a dynamite 45, 50-minute album. And then we may be talking about it in even higher standards. As it is, even the stuff that I feel makes it a little bit too long is still really strong. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what, for me anyway, what makes this a very good album and not a great album. But it's one of their better albums, I think. There's a playfulness about this band and this album that I find really endearing. I love the arrangements. I love the fact that these two guys have really great vocal styles and they sound so different from each other. And the vocals are just as much weaving together and around each other and away from each other as the guitars and the keyboards are. And just there's a playfulness to this album, which I really love. You know, Chad mentioned this Americana thing. And I mean, let's be honest here. There hasn't been a ton of truly great American prog bands over the years. You know, we could probably count most of them on one or two hands, maybe. But they don't sound like Kansas. They got a little Happy the Man in them. They have a little, you know, more of the British stuff. Gentle Giant. There's some Canterbury feel in their music. But man, you know, you hear some of these arrangements. I mean, it's just it like brings a smile to your face when you listen to this music, and I really love them for that. And they have always released quality music, and it's a really strong album. I think they have a couple others that probably eclipse this, but I always hold this one in pretty high regard. I generally say this is a top 3 Echolyn album for me, but you know, that it changes over time. Now this, like Eric mentioned, is a fully realized debut. You know, other than the fact that this is the only album of the 3, not that there's a lot of albums that have vocals on it, shouldn't scare anybody off. Yes, they're in Swedish. I think they treat the vocals kind of like another instrument. So it's almost like if they decided to have theremin on a couple of songs and they threw out a couple little bars to just throw that in there, because they've got everything but the kitchen sink on this album. You know, any one track will take you through acoustic guitars, electric guitars, Rickenbacker bass, a myriad of percussion, mellotron, flute, Hammond organ, synths. I mean, it's just, you get everything. And I think the yin and yang of this album is just spectacular. It's just like a rubber band, right? They go from one extreme to the other at the drop of a hat, all within one track, and they leave you breathless. Mm-hmm. And you know, the whole comment I made on this morning's show about them sitting out in the woods of Sweden, you know, with a generator, with all their electric instruments plugged in and a whole bunch of acoustic instruments, and they're there for 2 days and they're just recording anything that comes to mind. That's always what I got with this band when I listen to them, because it's like they're just recording for themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The picture on the inside, it's a mellotron sitting out in the field.
Yeah. I mean,
I think like the cover of Epilogue. I mean, it's
doesn't get more woodsy than that.
There you
right?
go. Yeah. They have the cover of Epilogue, makes me think that's where they did it. That's where they plugged the generator in.
Yeah. To me, it's like the most electric folk music you'll ever hear. And at the same moment, it's like the most folky electric music you'll ever hear. It's like somewhere in between. But it's as loose as it sounds at times. It's very very tidily arranged. They're like the world's best classical rock band, but you know, they borrow from a lot of bands from the 70s, but yet they don't like mimic them. which I think is key. Like we've all mentioned bands that we hear bits and pieces from, whether it's Genesis, yes, King Crimson, Jethro Tull. I hear some PFM in their music too, because there's like this kind of like really emotional, romantic nature of their music, but they don't sound like any of those bands, which I think is cool.
And at the same time, they keep it very Scandinavian.
Yeah.
It has that Scandinavian sort of cold, dramatic feel. So
yeah, it does. It really does. So, I mean, you probably guess which direction I'm going here, but, you know, I got to pick this. I also, you know, not that we want to derail the whole conversation, but like this compared to their second and their third album, I mean, they're all three of them are like,
oh, fantastic.
5 out of 5 star, right? And it's like, there are days where I like the second album the most. There are days where I sometimes think the arrangements are the best on this album. But then, man, you listen to that third album that they did, like, you know, all those years later, that's terrific. And there are days where I'm like, man, that third album is like the best thing they ever did. So it's a catalog.
The cool thing about that third album is, well, yeah, like you said, it was created so many years later, and without Tord Lindemann, he had left. He had been gone for a long time since then. But there are no recurring themes in those songs.
No, nothing.
They don't come back like they do on these other two albums. And it's actually something called through composed. It's actually a very deliberate way of writing songs, apparently. And there's a lot of Van der Graaf Generator songs are that way.
Yep.
You don't get a recurring theme.
Yep.
And it's I had never heard the term until this album came out, Vilgens Oga. But it's just as spectacular as the other two. Yeah. I can't recommend it more highly. I mean, you've got what, four songs, well over 10 minutes. You've got a 15, a 12, a 16, and a 13. And really, it mimics the format of Hybris in that respect, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Pretty amazing. And even, you know, we've had, again, it's been a decade since that album, and we've had all these various Anglagard offshoots, and most of them have all been terrific too. I think we're all kind of waiting for them to come out with something else.
They have new members. They said they're working on something, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, that would be just absolutely amazing. So, yeah. So we got a sweep here, but again, that's nothing against this.
Yeah. Oh.
I feel bad.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is? It's like you've got a seminal, very strong album from the early 90s going up against, I mean, like a modern classic, in my opinion. Yeah. As Eric stated, these albums are 30 years old now. These are not new albums by any means, which leads me into kind of where I want to take this in closing. For all of you who watch In the Prog Seat or Hudson Valley Squares, or, you know, any of these shows we do across the channel, I know we have a lot of viewers who always go back to the classics from the 70s and the 80s and the stuff we all grew up on. And I get it. We all love them too here. However, you know, I'm going to kind of plead to a lot of folks here right now that great music didn't start happening in 1985 or 1990. Even an older guy like me knows that there have been a lot of really good bands and albums that have been released over the last 30 years that just need to be discovered if you just give them a try. I mean, if there's someone out there who loves a lot of the bands we just talked about, and you haven't listened to either one of these, and you're going to discount them just because, oh, they came out in the 90s, you really need to rethink that. And you really need to give this a try, because these are terrific albums of modern progressive rock. It's not even that modern anymore, right? But it's just
30 years.
Yeah, it's 30 years old, right? And both of these bands have other albums that are equally as good as these, if not better. And you're really missing out if you're just automatically discounting anything that's been released.
Yeah, these are two of the bands that kicked off the modern era.
Yeah,
progressive rock. That's one way to say it.
And there are others. I mean, these are not the only ones. I mean, we mentioned some of them. You know, Spock's Beard and Porcupine Tree, Anecdote, Flower Kings. I mean, we can go on and on and on. There's a lot of them that.
John Corrette.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, there's so many of them from all over the world. And you know, if you're a real hardcore prog fan from the 70s, there's been a lot of good music that have been released since 1990. A lot. And so give these two a try. and not just one listen, give them a couple listens. I think they'll get under your skin and you'll want to hear more. So we got a winner here, but for those of you watching who do know these albums pretty well, please cast your vote down below in the comments. Let us know what you think. Is it Suffocating the Bloom or is it Hybris? You be the judge. We voted for Anglagard, but we love them both. There's no loser here. So
100%.
There we have it. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Stay tuned for another episode of In the Prog Seat next Tuesday night. For Eric Porter, Chuck Alvarez, and Mr. Nearfest himself, Chad Hutchinson, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you real soon. Stay tuned for more stuff here on the channel. Bye-bye.